In this video, we're going to discuss more about dialing in the flavor of your coffee, but specifically for pre-ground coffee, or when you put coffee powder directly into the filter, perhaps with store-bought or pre-packaged. So the first step you would do when doing so is turning on the machine and then pressing this button here. And that lets the machine know that it'll not be needing to use the grinder and that we are putting the coffee directly into the filter ourselves. So things that you can do to adjust that, the major variables will be the size of the grinds, the amount of grinds, and the amount of water you use. So with that said, if we use a lot of coffee and a small amount of water, and I must remind you that the machine will always use all of the water that is in the actual tank per cycle. So if you use a large amount of water and a small amount of coffee, you would get a much weaker flavored coffee. But if you use a high amount of coffee and a low amount of water, you would get the opposite result, being a very strong, full flavored coffee, perhaps too strong in some cases. Okay, so what we can do to adjust these things, aside from the actual amount of coffee and water that we put into the filter and tank, we can also adjust the variable of the strength by turning on or off the pre-infusion. Okay, so this bean button here, without using the grinder when using the pre-ground coffee function, does not have a purpose with the first two bean buttons, but when you select 3 beans, this then initiates what's called a pre-infusion cycle. And basically pre-infusion, also known as pre-bloom, is when the machine will add some hot water to the bed of coffee grounds, and then it'll just let that rest for a moment before continuing the brew cycle. And what this does is it unlocks some deeper flavors, as well as just gives it more time under contact with hot water, which equals to more extraction. So again, when using the 3 bean option, it'll add hot water to your bed of coffee, and then it'll pause the brewing for a brief moment, and then it'll continue to use the rest of the water in the tank. And this will give a more deep flavor, but also a slightly stronger brew of coffee. Finally, the last variable that I mentioned that will adjust the flavor of your coffee will be the size of the actual coffee grounds. Now, if you're buying pre-ground coffee, that's often not much control that you may have over this, but different manufacturers, or if you pay someone to grind it for you, may result in different grind sizes. With that said, a larger grind size, the individual pieces of ground coffee being larger, will allow the water to flow more quickly through this. And in some cases, a very quick flow rate would result in a more sour flavored coffee, which would highlight brighter notes, maybe even a bit fruitier flavored coffee, versus a finer grind size would restrict the water flow, slow it down, which means more time for that water to be in contact with the coffee powder, resulting in more of the other end of the spectrum, which may be sweeter and often even strong bitter notes